There's a moment many people experience, though they rarely talk about it openly. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. There's no confrontation, no argument, no visible crisis. It's quiet. You've just finished a conversation, maybe with a friend, maybe with a partner, maybe with a family member you've known your entire life. The conversation ended normally. No one raised their voice. No one said anything cruel. You both said goodbye. See you later. Talk soon. Nothing went wrong. But now you're alone, and something shifts. Your chest tightens slightly. Your mind immediately begins replaying the conversation, scanning through it like security footage, searching for the moment when you said too much, the moment when your voice sounded too needy, the moment when you revealed too much about how you actually feel, the moment when their expression changed just barely and you caught it but weren't sure what it meant. You're examining tone, word choice, the length of their responses. Did they seem different at the end? Did they sound slightly more distant? Did they take a second longer to respond when you said that thing about yourself? Maybe you said too much. Maybe you were too honest. Maybe you asked for too much. Maybe they saw something in you that was too complicated, too needy, too much work. And now you're sitting there, breath held, waiting for the inevitable, waiting for them to pull away, waiting for the text that doesn't come, waiting for the moment when they realize you're not worth the effort. This isn't a one-time occurrence, it's a pattern. After every meaningful interaction, there's this quiet certainty that settles in. Not that something bad will happen, but that they'll leave, that you've revealed too much of yourself and now they've seen it. The part of you that's too much, the part that requires too much attention, the part that feels too intensely. And once they've seen it, they'll realize what everyone eventually realizes, that you're exhausting, that you're high maintenance, that there are easier people to be close to. You realize you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, not wondering if, wondering when. This is the psychological world of the perpetually anxious attacher, the person who lives one mistake away from abandonment. And if this feels familiar, it's not because you're broken or dramatic. It's not because you're paranoid or imagining things. It's because your nervous system learned something very early, something fundamental about how connection works, that shaped how you hold on to people. By holding yourself back, by monitoring every interaction, by preparing always for loss. Abandonment. Fear doesn't always start with abandonment. Sometimes it starts with inconsistency. Sometimes it starts with a parent who was warm one morning, cold by afternoon, distant by evening. You never knew which version you'd get. The parent who smiled at your accomplishments one day and seemed irritated by them the next. The caregiver who hugged you when they were in a good mood and pulled away when they weren't. Love that felt like weather, unpredictable, shifting, never fully reliable. Or sometimes it started with conditional love, love that came with requirements. I love you, but I love you when you're good. I love you if you're quiet. I love you as long as you don't cause problems. I love you if you make me proud. The child's brain, brilliant at pattern recognition, learns something devastating. That love is something you can lose. that connection depends on performance, that who you are, fundamentally, might not be enough. So you become who they need. You learn to read the room before entering it. You learn to adjust your personality to match their mood. You learn to become smaller, quieter, easier. Or sometimes it started with actual loss. A parent who left, a parent who died, a divorce that split your world, a caregiver who was there and then wasn't, and no amount of being good brought them back. The brain, trying to make sense of this, doesn't land on the complicated truth that adults have complicated lives. It lands on something simpler, something the child can control. If they left, something about me must have caused it. If I was better, they would have stayed. Children are meaning-making machines. They don't think my caregivers are overwhelmed. They don't think my parent is dealing with their own trauma. They think something about me wasn't lovable enough. And that belief doesn't disappear when childhood ends. It doesn't fade with maturity. It matures with you. It disguises itself as adult independence, as self-reliance, as being low maintenance. But underneath, this same mechanism is running. The certainty that connection is conditional, that love can be lost, that the safest strategy is to monitor constantly for signs of withdrawal. The brain learns a devastating equation. Closeness equals vulnerability. Vulnerability equals the potential for pain. The more you care, the more you have to lose. So the nervous system trying to protect you develops a surveillance system, not because you're paranoid, because you're trying to survive the only way you learned how, by seeing abandonment coming, by catching it early, by never being surprised by loss again. This pattern doesn't stay in childhood. It matures. It disguises itself. It follows you into every relationship, wearing new names: independence, self-sufficiency, being easygoing, not needing much. On the surface, people with abandonment anxiety often look calm, maybe even confident. They function, they work, they maintain friendships, they date, they get through days without falling apart. From the outside, everything looks fine. Inside, there's a surveillance system running constantly. An emotional metal detector that never turns off. Every interaction gets scanned. Every conversation gets analysed. Every slight change in someone's behaviour gets noted, filed, examined for meaning. Did they take longer to text back today? Did their tone seem different? Did they use a period instead of an exclamation point? Did they say quote 0 instead of quote 1? The mind catalogues these things, building a case, evidence that it's happening, that they're pulling away, that the abandonment you've been expecting is finally beginning. You don't want to be this way. You know, intellectually, that analysing punctuation choices is probably excessive. You know that people have busy days, bad moods, distractions that have nothing to do with you. But knowing doesn't stop the spiral, because this isn't happening in your rational mind. It's happening in your nervous system, in the part of your brain that learned, very early, that connection is dangerous, that people leave, that the cost of being caught off guard is too high. On the surface, you might look fine. Inside, there's a constant negotiation happening, a quiet calculation. How much can I ask for before it's too much? How much can I need before I become a burden? How much of myself can I show before they see the parts that are unlovable? This internal monitoring is exhausting in ways people don't see. You're managing two realities simultaneously. The external reality, where you're having a normal conversation, making plans, responding to texts, and the internal reality, where you're tracking threat levels, assessing risk, preparing for loss. One part of you desperately wants closeness, wants to be known fully, wants to relax into connection without constantly checking if it's still safe. Another part of you is terrified of exactly that, because being fully seen means being fully vulnerable, and vulnerability, your nervous system has learned, leads to abandonment. So there's a split. The part that reaches for connection, the part that recoils from it, both running simultaneously, creating a push-pull that exhausts you and confuses everyone around you. You're not overthinking, you're over-surviving. Your brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do. Protect you from the pain of unexpected loss. The problem is the protection system designed for childhood doesn't turn off in adulthood. It keeps running, keeps scanning, keeps finding threats, even when there aren't any. Because to your nervous system, the absence of immediate reassurance feels like the beginning of abandonment. Neutrality reads as rejection. Someone being busy reads as pulling away. The nervous system that learned to anticipate loss now sees it everywhere. This internal monitoring creates patterns that reach into every relationship. And one of the most common, most exhausting patterns is people-pleasing. Not because you lack opinions or preferences, but because having them feels dangerous. One of the most common adaptations is becoming exceptionally easy to be around, agreeable, flexible, low maintenance, the person who always says yes, who never complains, who adjusts to everyone else's needs without being asked. From the outside, this looks like being easygoing. From the inside, it's a strategy, a negotiation with abandonment. If I can be perfect enough, easy enough, convenient enough, maybe I'll be safe. Maybe they won't leave. You learn to apologize before anyone's upset. Sorry becomes your default. Sorry I'm late, even when you're early. Sorry for asking. Sorry for needing. Sorry for existing in a way that might require something from someone else. The apology isn't about what you did. It's about what you are. It's a preemptive strike against rejection. If you apologize first, maybe their potential annoyance won't land as hard. Maybe you can soften the blow of being too much before they realize you're too much. You learn to morph, to become whatever the other person seems to need. If they need someone calm, you're calm. If they need someone excited, you're excited. If they need someone to listen, you listen. If they need someone to agree, you agree. You read the room before you enter it. You assess what's needed and you provide it. Not because you're manipulative, because your nervous system learned that love is conditional. That connection depends on being the right version of yourself. The version that doesn't cause problems, the version that doesn't ask for too much. When someone asks what you want to do, your mind goes blank. Not because you don't have preferences, but because your preferences feel dangerous. What if you choose wrong? What if you pick something they don't enjoy and they blame you? What if your needs inconvenience them and they decide you're not worth the trouble? So you default to the same phrases. Whatever you want is fine. I'm easy. I don't mind. Anything works for me. You've trained yourself out of having desires because having desires creates the possibility of conflict, and conflict creates the possibility of loss. You anticipate needs before they're expressed. You notice when someone's drink is empty, when they seem tired, when they might need space. You become exceptionally good at reading people, at knowing what they need before they do. This looks like empathy. Sometimes it is, but often it's survival. You're scanning for needs so you can meet them, so you can be useful, so you can become necessary. Because if you're useful enough, maybe they won't leave. You say yes when you mean no. You smile when you're hurt. You accommodate when you're exhausted. You agree to plans you don't want. You tolerate behavior that bothers you. You shrink your needs down to almost nothing and call it being flexible. But flexibility isn't the same as self-abandonment, and accommodation isn't the same as connection. What you're doing isn't building relationships. You're building insurance policies against abandonment. If I never cause problems, they can't leave because of problems I caused. The exhaustion of this is invisible. You're managing your behavior constantly, monitoring your tone, choosing your words carefully, making sure you're not too much, not too needy, not too complicated, not too emotional, not too present. The mental load of this is staggering. You're running a constant calculation. How much of myself can I show without triggering rejection? How much can I need without becoming a burden? How much can I ask for without being too much? And underneath all of this is a belief that's rarely spoken but always present, that your needs drove people away before, that your emotions were too big, that your presence was too demanding, that the real you, the uncensored you, is too much for people to handle. So you perform a smaller version, the edited version, the version that requires less, because the version that requires less feels safer, feels more likely to stay. But here's what people-pleasing really is. It's a negotiation with abandonment. It's a bargain your nervous system is trying to make. If I can be perfect enough, small enough, easy enough, undemanding enough, maybe I'll finally be safe. Maybe this time they won't leave. Maybe if I never ask for too much, they'll never have a reason to pull away. It's not kindness. It's not generosity. It's fear wearing the mask of agreeability. Yet even perfect compliance doesn't stop the fear, because the threat isn't outside. It's inside, in how you've learned to see yourself, in the belief, buried deep, that who you are fundamentally is too much, that your core self, if fully revealed, would be rejected. So you keep parts of yourself hidden. You edit, you curate, you present only the parts that seem safe, and the rest, the parts that need too much or feel too intensely or want too deeply, those parts get locked away. Those parts your nervous system has decided are the dangerous parts, the parts that cause abandonment. Underneath the people-pleasing is a deeper fear, the fear that you, simply as you are too much. Not too much in your actions or your requests, too much in your existence, too much in your needs, too much in your feelings, too much in how much you care, how deeply you feel, how intensely you want connection. The belief that there's something fundamentally excessive about your emotional landscape. You describe yourself in these terms. I'm too needy. I'm too sensitive. I'm too intense. I'm too much work. I'm too complicated. These aren't neutral observations, they're verdicts. Judgments you've internalized about your own acceptability. You carry a quiet certainty that your emotional needs are burdensome, that the amount of reassurance you need is unreasonable, that the depth of your feelings makes you difficult to be around, that your desire for closeness is excessive. You minimize constantly. When someone asks how you are, you default to fine. When you're hurt, you downplay it. When you need something, you convince yourself you don't. When you want reassurance, you tell yourself you're being ridiculous. When you feel scared that someone's pulling away, you talk yourself out of bringing it up. Don't be needy. Don't be clingy. Don't be that person. The person who needs too much. The person who's exhausting to love. You've learned to treat your own needs as inconveniences, as problems to be managed rather than legitimate parts of being human. When you want to reach out to someone, you stop yourself. They're probably busy. They probably don't want to hear from me. I don't want to bother them. When you want to express hurt, you swallow it. It's not a big deal. I'm being too sensitive. I'm overreacting. When you want comfort, you deny yourself. I should be able to handle this alone. I shouldn't need reassurance. I'm an adult. There's a shame around wanting connection, a belief that needing reassurance means you're weak, that wanting someone to check in means you're needy, that feeling hurt when someone's distant means you're too sensitive. So you hide those needs, you minimize them, you talk yourself out of them. You convince yourself that normal human desires for connection are character flaws that make you unlovable. What you want to ask, quote 2, what you actually say, quote 3. Or, more often, you say nothing, you wait, you monitor, you check their social media to see if they're distant with everyone or just with you. You reread old messages to compare their tone. You analyze the gap between messages. You build a case in your mind about what's happening, but you don't ask. Because asking would reveal the need, and revealing the need feels like exposing the part of you that's too much. You've learned to hide emotional needs until they become unbearable. Until they explode in ways that feel disproportionate to the situation. Someone does something small, something that wouldn't bother most people, and you fall apart. Not because the situation is that bad, but because you've been holding everything in for so long that this small thing became the breaking point. Then you feel guilty for overreacting, for being dramatic, for proving to yourself that you are in fact too much. The fear whispers constantly. What if I ask for reassurance and they get annoyed? What if I express hurt and they think I'm dramatic? What if I show them how much I'm struggling and they decide I'm too much work? What if my needs are the reason they leave? So you keep them hidden. You present a version of yourself that seems manageable, seems easy, seems like it doesn't need much, but inside, you're starving for the very thing you're too afraid to ask for: connection, reassurance, the feeling that someone wants you there, not just tolerates your presence. You watch other people ask for things easily, express needs without shame, say, "I need reassurance right now," or "I'm feeling insecure," or "Can we talk?" And you wonder how they do that. How they trust that their needs won't be met with annoyance or rejection. How they believe they're worth the effort. You can't imagine doing that. Can't imagine saying "I need you" without immediately following it with, "But it's fine if you're busy," or "Never mind," or "I'm probably just being needy." Part of you wants to be close, wants to be fully known, wants to show up exactly as you are, needs and all, and trust that you'll still be wanted. Another part of you knows, with absolute certainty, that doing so would be catastrophic, that showing your full self would trigger the rejection you've been trying to avoid. So you stay hidden, you stay small, you stay quiet about what you actually need, and you wonder why connection never feels quite real. Why even when someone's close, you feel alone. So you perform a strange calculus. How much of myself can I show before it's too much? How much can I need before I become a burden? How much can I feel before I'm too sensitive? How much can I want before I'm too needy? The answer you've learned: less, always less. Less emotion, less need, less presence, less of you. Because more of you, your nervous system has decided, is what causes people to leave. When you expect abandonment, you become exceptionally good at detecting it, even when it's not there. Your nervous system, trained to anticipate loss, develops what feels like a superpower. You can sense withdrawal before it's visible. You can feel distance before it's spoken. You can detect the slightest shift in someone's energy and know immediately that something's wrong, that they're pulling away, that the abandonment you've been preparing for is finally beginning. A friend takes 30 minutes to respond instead of 10. Your mind immediately goes to work. They're pulling away. They're tired of me. They're finding excuses not to engage. They've realized I'm too much. It doesn't matter that they might be in a meeting, driving, or simply doing something else. The nervous system doesn't consider benign explanations. It jumps straight to abandonment, because abandonment is what it's been watching for. Someone's tone sounds slightly different in a text, slightly less enthusiastic, slightly more formal. You read the message over and over, comparing it to their usual style, analysing punctuation, counting exclamation points. They used a period instead of an exclamation point. That means something. They said quote 11 instead of quote 12. That's a sign. They're done. They're over it. They're withdrawing. The evidence seems clear. They're leaving. Slowly. Quietly. But definitely. Plans get cancelled. They said they had a work thing come up. A family obligation. They're not feeling well. You say it's fine. You say you understand. But inside you know. This is how it starts. This is the beginning of the slow fade. Next time, they'll have another excuse. Then another. Until eventually they stop making excuses. They just stop responding. This, your mind tells you, is the pattern. This is how people leave. Gradually, politely. With reasonable sounding explanations that are really just covers for the truth. That they don't want to be around you anymore. You become a detective of your own abandonment, gathering evidence, building a case. When they do reach out, you analyze how long it took. When they make plans, you note how enthusiastic they seemed. When they are with you, you watch their face, their body language, their phone. Are they checking it more than usual? Are they distracted? Are they looking for an exit? Every interaction becomes a data point. Every piece of data gets sorted into one of two categories: evidence they're staying, evidence they're leaving. And somehow, the mind always finds more evidence for leaving. The nervous system that learned to anticipate loss now sees it everywhere. Your brain, trying to protect you from being blindsided, has become hypersensitive to rejection. It's a smoke alarm that interprets everything as smoke. Someone's quiet, they're pulling away. Someone's busy, they don't have time for you anymore. Someone seems off. They've realized you're too much. The brain isn't trying to torture you, it's trying to prepare you, to give you warning, to make sure you're never caught off guard by abandonment again. But this hypervigilance comes with a cost. You live in a constant state of low-grade panic, always waiting, always watching, always preparing for loss. Neutral interactions get interpreted as negative. Normal distance gets interpreted as rejection. Ordinary human behavior gets filtered through the lens of abandonment. Your friend needs a night alone. They're pulling away. Your partner seems tired. They're losing interest. Your family member doesn't call. They've finally had enough of you. The cruel irony is that you're often wrong. The abandonment you're detecting isn't happening. The person isn't pulling away. They're just busy, distracted, tired, dealing with their own things that have nothing to do with you. But your nervous system doesn't believe that, can't believe that. Because believing that would mean letting your guard down. And letting your guard down feels dangerous. So you stay vigilant, stay watchful, stay ready for the loss that might not be coming. And sometimes the hypervigilance creates what it fears. When you're constantly scanning for signs of rejection, constantly asking for reassurance, constantly monitoring someone's behavior, they feel it. They feel watched, analyzed. Like they can't do anything without it being interpreted as evidence of something larger. And that pressure, that intensity of being constantly monitored, can push people away. Not because you're too much, but because the constant need for reassurance becomes exhausting for them. The very strategy meant to prevent abandonment ends up creating distance. This is the devastating trap. Your fear of abandonment makes you hypervigilant. Your hypervigilance makes you see abandonment where it doesn't exist. Your response to that perceived abandonment creates actual distance, and that distance confirms your original fear, that people leave, that you're too much, that abandonment is inevitable. The self-fulfilling prophecy completes itself, not because your fear was accurate, but because your fear changed the reality. And when the fear becomes unbearable, many people do something that seems contradictory but makes perfect sense. They pull away first. They create distance. They abandon before being abandoned. Because if there's one thing worse than loss, it's unexpected loss. And if there's one thing worse than being abandoned, it's being abandoned after you let yourself hope it wouldn't happen. Sometimes the fear of abandonment leads to a strange strategy: leaving first, pulling away before they can, creating distance to see if they'll pursue. testing the relationship to see if it's real, self-sabotaging connection, because sabotage feels safer than waiting for inevitable loss. The logic is brutal but clear. I can't be abandoned if I leave first. I can't be blindsided if I'm the one creating distance. I can't be destroyed by loss if I'm the one in control of it. You feel the relationship getting close, becoming important, mattering more than you meant to let it. And something inside you panics, because mattering means vulnerability. And vulnerability means potential for devastation. So you start creating distance, not consciously, not intentionally. But the nervous system, sensing danger, starts its protective protocol. You pull back, you become less available, you stop reaching out as much, you create space where there wasn't space before. Or you test them, you pull away slightly to see if they'll notice, if they'll ask what's wrong, if they'll fight for you. You become a little colder, a little more distant, waiting to see if they'll pursue. This isn't manipulation. It's a desperate attempt to answer a question. Do they actually want me here? Or are they just tolerating my presence? If I pull away and they don't come after me, then I'll know. Then I'll have confirmation that they were going to leave anyway. Better to know now than be surprised later. Sometimes you manufacture conflict, not because you want to fight, but because fighting at least creates intensity, creates engagement, and engagement feels safer than indifference. You pick at small things. You create problems where there weren't problems. You test the boundaries of their patience. If they stay through the difficulty, maybe that means they really want you. Maybe that means the connection is real, but often what happens instead is they get exhausted. They don't understand why you're suddenly distant or difficult. They pull back because you pushed them away, and your fear becomes reality. You find flaws in people who get too close. Suddenly their habits that didn't bother you before become intolerable. The way they chew, the way they laugh, the things they talk about. These flaws become evidence that the relationship won't work, that you should leave now before it gets worse, before you get more attached, before the inevitable abandonment becomes more painful. Your mind, in its attempt to protect you, starts building a case for why this person isn't right, why you should leave, why ending it now is the smart choice. Part of you wants to run, wants to disappear before they can disappoint you, wants to be the one who leaves so you're not the one left behind. Another part of you desperately wants them to chase, wants them to fight for you, wants them to prove that they'll stay even when you make it difficult. So you create this push-pull dynamic. Come close. No. Go away. I need you. No. Leave me alone. The other person doesn't know which version to respond to. They don't understand that both are real, that you simultaneously want closeness and are terrified of it. The belief underneath all of this is devastating. If I leave first, I maintain control. If I create the distance, I control the loss. If I sabotage the relationship, at least I know why it ended. At least I'm not waiting, helpless, for them to decide I'm not worth staying for. Leaving first feels like power, feels like protection, feels like the only way to avoid the devastation of being left. But here's the painful truth. Pulling away to avoid abandonment often creates the very thing you fear. When you become distant, they feel it. When you pull back, they notice. When you create conflict, they get hurt. And eventually, tired of the push-pull, tired of not knowing where they stand, tired of fighting for someone who keeps pushing them away, they leave. Not because they wanted to, but because you made it impossible to stay. The abandonment you were trying to prevent becomes reality. Not because it was inevitable, but because your fear of it shaped the outcome. You wanted them to prove they'd stay. Instead, you gave them reasons to go. You wanted to protect yourself from surprise. Instead, you created the loss you were trying to avoid. The strategy that was meant to keep you safe ended up confirming your deepest fear, that people leave, that you're not worth fighting for, that abandonment is inevitable. But it wasn't inevitable. It was created by the very fear that was supposed to protect you from it. This pattern shows up everywhere, but it shows up most intensely, most clearly in romantic relationships. Because in romance, the stakes feel highest. In romance, abandonment doesn't just mean loss of connection. It feels like confirmation of your deepest fear, that you're unlovable, that you're too much. That intimacy with you is ultimately unbearable. In romantic relationships, abandonment fear doesn't just whisper, it shouts. In romantic relationships, abandonment anxiety reaches its peak intensity, because romantic connection involves everything your nervous system fears most: vulnerability, dependence, the potential for deep hurt, the possibility that someone will see all of you and decide it's too much. Dating for someone with abandonment fear isn't exciting. It's terrifying, because every new connection carries the potential for devastating loss. The early stages often feel intense, not the good kind of intense, the desperate kind. You meet someone and immediately attach, not gradually, not slowly, but quickly, completely, with an urgency that surprises even you. Your mind is already imagining futures, already planning, already needing them in ways that don't match the actual length of time you've known them. Because your nervous system doesn't experience new connection as possibility. It experiences it as potential loss, so it grabs on, holds tight, tries to secure the connection before it can disappear. You need reassurance constantly. Are we okay? Do you still like me? Are you sure? Did I do something wrong? The questions come in waves. After every date, after every conversation, after every moment of physical distance, your partner says they had a good time. Your mind immediately questions if they meant it. They say they'll text later. You spend the next hours analysing how much later means. They seem quiet. You spiral into certainty that they've changed their mind, that they've seen something in you that turned them off, that this is the beginning of the end. Every text gets analysed for signs of declining interest. They used to send paragraphs. Now they send sentences. That means something. They used to use multiple exclamation points. Now they use periods. That's evidence. They used to text first thing in the morning. Now they wait until afternoon. They're pulling away. The withdrawal has begun. You catalogue these changes like a detective building a case. Because to you, they're not just changes in communication style. They're proof that the abandonment you've been expecting is finally happening. You need to know where they are, not because you're controlling, but because knowing calms the panic. When they're with you, your nervous system can relax slightly. When they're elsewhere, the fear rises. What if they're realizing they don't miss you? What if they're having more fun without you? What if they're meeting someone else, someone easier, someone who doesn't need so much reassurance? You want to text, want to check in, want to know they're thinking about you, but you also don't want to be needy, don't want to be clingy, so you wait. And the waiting is torture. Jealousy becomes constant, not jealousy born from distrust of your partner, jealousy born from distrust of your own worthiness. When they mention spending time with someone else, anyone else, your mind goes immediately to threat. What if that person is better than me? More attractive, more interesting, more fun to be around? What if my partner realizes there are easier people to date? People who don't need constant reassurance. People who don't analyze every interaction. People who aren't constantly afraid. You compare yourself to everyone, to their exes, to their friends, to strangers they interact with briefly. You're looking for evidence that someone else is more deserving of their attention, more worthy of their affection. Because in your mind, love is competitive. Love is something you can lose to someone better, someone less complicated, someone whose presence doesn't come with the weight of constant need. Your partner tries to reassure you. They tell you they care. They tell you they're not going anywhere. They tell you they enjoy being with you. And for a moment it helps. For a moment the panic subsides, but the relief doesn't last. Because reassurance for someone with abandonment anxiety is like water to someone with a leak. You need it constantly. The comfort drains away quickly, and you're back to needing more. Needing another confirmation, another proof that they still want you, that they haven't changed their mind, that you haven't become too much yet. The relationship becomes defined by this cycle. You cling, you need, you seek reassurance, they provide it. You feel briefly calm. The fear returns. You need more reassurance. They provide it, but with slightly less enthusiasm because they've already said it 3 times today. You notice the decreased enthusiasm. You interpret it as proof they're getting tired of you. The fear intensifies. You need even more reassurance. They start to feel exhausted. The constant need for proof of their feelings starts to feel like pressure, like their love is being constantly questioned. They pull back slightly, not because they're leaving, because they need breathing room. You feel the pullback. Your worst fear is confirmed. They're leaving. They've finally realized you're too much. This is the cruel irony. The more you try to prevent abandonment through seeking reassurance, the more likely you are to create distance. Because love that requires constant proof isn't experienced as love. It's experienced as pressure. It's experienced as never being enough. Your partner feels like nothing they do is sufficient. No amount of reassurance seems to stick. No amount of affirmation seems to calm your fear. And eventually they get tired, not of you, of the role, of being responsible for regulating your nervous system, of having to prove constantly that they're not leaving. Healthy partners, partners who might have actually stayed, start to feel drained. They care about you. They might even love you. But the constant monitoring, the constant need for reassurance, the constant feeling of being tested, it exhausts them. They start to wonder if they're equipped to be with someone who needs this much, not because the need is inherently too much, but because they're being asked to heal wounds they didn't create. And they can't. No amount of their love can fix what broke inside you before they arrived. And so the thing you feared happens. They leave. They pull away. They end it. And your mind takes this as confirmation. See? I was right. They left. Just like everyone leaves. Just like I knew they would. The abandonment fear that created the pressure, that created the distance, that created the ending, gets interpreted as evidence that you were correct all along. That people leave, that you're too much, that abandonment is inevitable. The self-fulfilling prophecy completes itself. And the belief gets stronger. But abandonment fear doesn't only show up in romance. It echoes through every connection, through friendships, through family, through any relationship where loss feels possible, which for someone with abandonment anxiety is every relationship. Abandonment anxiety doesn't limit itself to romantic love. It permeates every relationship where loss feels possible, where connection matters, where someone's presence in your life has become something you need. It shows up in friendships. It shows up in family dynamics. It shows up in professional relationships. Anywhere closeness exists, abandonment fear follows. In friendships, it manifests as a constant question. Am I the backup friend? The one people think of second? The one they make plans with only when their first choice isn't available? You notice when friends spend time with other friends. You catalogue who they choose when they can only see one person. You keep track of who texts first, who initiates plans, who seems more enthusiastic about getting together, and you're always assessing your ranking. Where you fall in their hierarchy of important people, whether you matter as much to them as they matter to you. When a friend cancels plans, even with a legitimate reason, your mind goes immediately to abandonment. They don't actually want to see me. They're finding excuses. They're slowly fading out of my life. It doesn't matter that they have the flu, a work emergency, a family obligation. The cancellation becomes evidence of declining interest, proof that the friendship is ending. Next time, they'll have another excuse, then another, until eventually there are no more invitations, no more plans, just silence. You overgive in friendships. You're always the one checking in, the one remembering birthdays, the one offering help, the one available when they need something. You show up for them consistently, hoping that your reliability will make you indispensable, that if you're useful enough, present enough, supportive enough, they won't have a reason to pull away. But this creates an imbalance. You're giving from fear, not from genuine surplus. You're maintaining the friendship through effort, hoping they don't notice that the effort is one-sided. You read into everything. They didn't respond to your text right away. They must be annoyed with you. They seemed quieter than usual when you hung out. Something must be wrong. They posted about spending time with other friends without inviting you. They're replacing you. You're losing your place in their life. The friendship is ending. Your mind builds narratives from small pieces of data, creates stories about rejection from neutral facts. You hesitate to bring up hurt because bringing up hurt means admitting you care, admitting you were affected, admitting their actions matter to you. And mattering feels vulnerable, feels like giving them power, so you stay quiet. You pretend things don't bother you. You accommodate behavior that actually hurts, and the resentment builds, not anger at them. Anger at yourself for caring too much, for being affected by things that shouldn't bother you, for needing friendship more than they seem to need you. In family dynamics, abandonment anxiety takes a different form, because family was where it started. Family is where you first learned that connection could be conditional, that love could be withdrawn, that your worth was determined by something outside yourself, and even as an adult, even with awareness, even with distance, you're still trying to earn what should have been freely given. You're still seeking approval from parents who were never capable of giving it consistently. Still trying to be good enough. Still monitoring their mood to see if today is a day they'll be warm or a day they'll be cold. Still adapting yourself to fit their expectations, even though you're grown, even though you have your own life, even though intellectually you know you don't need their approval, but the child inside you is still trying to secure the connection that always felt precarious. With siblings, there's comparison. Are you the favourite? The forgotten one? The one they check on or the one they overlook? You notice who gets called more often, who gets asked about their life with genuine interest, who gets celebrated and who gets obligatory acknowledgement. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. You tell yourself you're an adult. But it does matter, because it confirms what you learned early, that love, even in family, is distributed unequally, that some people are worth more attention than others, and you never quite secured your place as someone worth prioritizing. In every connection, there's a quiet belief that you're forgettable, that you're everyone's second choice, that people would be fine if you disappeared. You don't say this out loud. You barely admit it to yourself. But it shapes how you interact. You expect less. You accept less. You tolerate behavior you shouldn't tolerate because you believe this is what you deserve. This is the best you can hope for. Connection that's partial, inconsistent, conditional. Because full, steady, unconditional connection isn't something your nervous system believes is possible. Not for you. And underneath all of this, running through romantic relationships, friendships, family, every form of connection is a question you've been asking since childhood. A question that hasn't been answered. A question that shapes everything. Am I worth staying for? Not in grand gestures, not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary life, in regular days, when I'm not performing, when I'm not perfect, when I'm just me. Am I enough? This question shapes not just how you connect with others, but how you connect with yourself. Because the most painful abandonment isn't when someone else leaves. It's when you abandon yourself, when you decide that your needs, your feelings, your full self are too much to allow, when you reject yourself preemptively so it hurts less when others do. Perhaps the most painful part of abandonment anxiety is how you treat yourself. The relationship you have with your own mind, the way you talk to yourself, the way you judge yourself for having needs, for feeling fear, for wanting reassurance, for needing connection. You're not just afraid others will abandon you, you're actively abandoning yourself. And that internal abandonment might be the deepest wound. You criticize yourself harshly. Why am I like this? Why can't I just be normal? Why can't I be one of those people who dates easily, who doesn't need constant reassurance, who doesn't analyze every interaction? Other people don't do this. Other people aren't this exhausting to be with. What's wrong with me? The criticism is relentless, constant, cutting. You speak to yourself in ways you'd never speak to another person, with contempt, with disgust, with frustration. You tell yourself you're too much, too needy, too sensitive, too intense, too clingy, too demanding. You've internalized every criticism you've heard or imagined. Every time someone pulled away, you decided it was because of something fundamentally wrong with you. Every relationship that ended became proof that you're unlovable in your natural state. So you try to be less emotional, less needy, less present, less you. Because more of you, you've decided, is what causes people to leave. There's shame around having emotional needs, shame around wanting reassurance, shame around needing comfort. You look at other people who seem fine alone, who seem unbothered by distance, who don't need constant contact, and you feel defective, like you missed some crucial developmental stage, like everyone else learned how to be self-sufficient and you didn't, like your need for connection is evidence of weakness. When you do express need and it's not met perfectly, you immediately regret it. See? I shouldn't have asked. I shouldn't have said anything. I'm too much. I should have just dealt with it myself. The message you're teaching yourself is devastating. That your needs are burdensome. That expressing them leads to rejection. That the safest strategy is to need nothing. To ask for nothing. To be completely self-sufficient. Even though that's not how humans are designed to function. Even though needing connection is not a flaw. Even though expressing needs is not too much, you engage in preemptive self-rejection. You reject yourself before others can. You criticize yourself before they do. You decide you're too much before they have a chance to decide it for you. The logic is brutal but clear. If I reject me first, their rejection will hurt less. If I already know I'm too much, being told I'm too much won't be a surprise. If I've already decided I'm unlovable, being left won't shatter me. You think this protects you. It doesn't. It just means you're experiencing rejection constantly. From yourself. The one person you can never escape. The inner voice that criticizes you sounds familiar. Because it is. It's not your voice originally. It's the voice of criticism you once heard. From a parent, from a caregiver, from someone whose opinion mattered so much that you internalized it. And now you do their job for them. You police yourself. You criticize yourself. You reject yourself. You've become your own abandoner. The wound doesn't just come from others leaving. It comes from you deciding over and over that parts of you are unacceptable. This self-criticism isn't self-awareness. It's self-punishment. Real self-awareness would be recognizing that you have abandonment anxiety and understanding where it came from without condemning yourself for it. Real self-awareness would be noticing your patterns without deciding those patterns make you defective. But what you're doing isn't awareness, it's warfare. You're at war with your own needs, at war with your own feelings, at war with the parts of you that want connection. And you're using shame as a weapon against yourself. You try to talk yourself out of your feelings. You're being ridiculous, you're overreacting. There's no reason to be this upset. Stop being so needy. Stop caring so much. Just be cool. Just be chill. Just be less. You think if you criticize yourself enough, you'll change. You'll become someone who doesn't need reassurance. Someone who doesn't get scared. Someone who's easy to be with. But you can't shame yourself into healing. Shame doesn't create change. It creates hiding, creates smallness, creates a version of you that's less authentic, not more functional. The deepest abandonment isn't when someone leaves, it's when you leave yourself, when you reject your own needs, when you decide your feelings are too much, when you choose self-criticism over self-compassion, when you abandon the parts of you that need care, need reassurance, need to be held. You're doing to yourself what you fear others will do. And you're doing it constantly, relentlessly, without mercy. And this self-abandonment is exhausting, more exhausting than the fear of being abandoned by others. Because abandonment by others happens occasionally. Abandonment by self happens every day. Every time you dismiss your feelings. Every time you tell yourself to be less. Every time you reject your own needs. You're enacting the very thing you fear. Not occasionally. Constantly. You've become your own worst fear. The person who leaves. The person who decides you're too much. The person who pulls away, except it's you doing it to yourself. Living with abandonment anxiety is exhausting in ways people don't see. You look fine, you function, you go to work, you maintain relationships, you make it through days. From the outside, everything looks manageable. Inside, you're running on empty. The constant monitoring, the constant analysing, the constant fear. It takes a toll, not just emotionally, physically, mentally, in every system of your being. The physical exhaustion is real. Your nervous system is constantly activated. The threat detection system that should only engage during actual danger never turns off. Your body is producing stress hormones constantly. Cortisol, adrenaline. Your system is in a state of low-grade emergency all the time. This affects everything. Your sleep, your digestion, your immune function, your ability to think clearly. You're exhausted not because you're weak, because your body is running a marathon while standing still. Your sleep is disrupted, not every night, but many nights. You lie there replaying conversations, analysing interactions, planning what you'll say if someone pulls away, preparing for abandonment that hasn't happened yet. Your mind won't shut off because shutting off feels dangerous. If you stop monitoring, you might miss something, might miss a sign, might be caught off guard, so you stay vigilant, even when your body desperately needs rest. Your mind is exhausted. The amount of mental energy spent analysing social interactions is staggering. Every text gets read multiple times. Every conversation gets replayed. Every facial expression gets interpreted. You're using cognitive resources constantly that other people use occasionally. Your brain is doing the work of 5 people, monitoring your behavior, monitoring others' behavior, planning responses, anticipating reactions, preparing for loss. This isn't a choice, it's compulsion. Your nervous system won't let you stop. Emotionally, you're drained. Living in constant fear is exhausting. The fear doesn't take breaks. It's there in the morning. It's there at night. It's there during good moments, whispering that they won't last. It's there during difficult moments, confirming your fears. You can't fully relax, can't fully let your guard down, can't experience joy without the shadow of potential loss hanging over it. Every good moment comes with the thought, this will end. They'll leave. I'll lose this. The inability to be fully present, fully relaxed, fully unguarded, it's exhausting. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with abandonment anxiety. You can be with someone and still feel alone, because you're never fully there. Part of you's always monitoring, always preparing, always waiting for the moment they'll realize you're too much. You're physically present but emotionally guarded, and that creates distance. Not the distance you fear from them, distance you create yourself, the loneliness of being hypervigilant even in connection. You can't fully receive love when it's offered. Someone tells you they care about you. Your mind immediately questions if they mean it, how long it will last, when they'll change their mind. Someone does something kind for you. You wonder what their motivation is, what they want in return. Whether this is real or temporary, you're so focused on protecting yourself from future pain that you can't fully experience present care. The very thing you're desperate for when it's offered, you can't take in, can't let land, can't trust. The exhaustion of maintaining perfect behavior is crushing. You're constantly monitoring yourself, making sure you're not too much, not too needy, not too emotional, not too present. The amount of self-regulation required to be constantly palatable is enormous. You're editing yourself constantly, choosing words carefully, monitoring tone, making sure your needs stay hidden, making sure your fear doesn't show. This performance of being fine, being easy, being low maintenance, it drains everything. And all of this leads to isolation. Not the isolation of being physically alone, the isolation of being emotionally alone. Even when you're with people, you pull back from friendships because the fear is too much. You avoid dating because the vulnerability is too scary. You keep family at distance because the childhood wounds are still too present. You tell yourself you're protecting yourself, but what you're really doing is confirming your fear, that you'll be alone. You're creating the isolation you fear through the very strategies meant to protect you from it. At some point, many people ask themselves a devastating question. Is connection worth this much pain? Is it worth the constant fear, the constant monitoring, the constant exhaustion? Would it be easier to just be alone, to stop trying, to accept that maybe you're not built for close relationships? The question itself is heartbreaking, because the answer should be obvious. Connection is worth it. But when connection has only ever come with terror, when closeness has only ever preceded loss, when love has only ever felt conditional, the cost starts to feel too high. And then there's the burnout, the point where you can't do it anymore, can't analyze anymore, can't seek reassurance anymore, can't try to prevent abandonment anymore. You're just tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of monitoring, tired of preparing for loss, tired of being at war with your own needs, tired of relationships that never feel fully safe, tired of yourself. The exhaustion becomes so complete that shutdown feels like the only option. Not dramatic, not sudden, just a slow withdrawal, a quiet giving up, a decision to stop trying so hard to hold on to something that feels like it was never fully yours anyway. And in that exhaustion, there's a delayed grief, not loud, not dramatic, but present. A grief that comes later, when you start to see, with clarity, what fear has cost you, what you've lost while trying not to lose anything, the friendships you pulled away from, the relationships you sabotaged, the connections you never fully allowed, the years spent in terror instead of presence, the authentic self you abandoned to become palatable. There's grief there, real grief, for what could have been different if you had felt safe. There's grief for relationships you ended because you were too afraid. The person who actually cared, but you couldn't believe it. The friend who tried to get close, but you kept pushing away. The partner who wanted to love you, but you made it impossible. Not because they were wrong for you, but because your fear was louder than their care. The relationships that might have worked if you hadn't been so convinced they would fail. You grieve the authentic self you've kept hidden, the version of you that has needs, that wants things, that feels deeply, that needs reassurance sometimes, that isn't always fine. You've spent years presenting an edited version, the palatable version, the version that doesn't ask for too much. And somewhere in that performance, the real you got lost. You grieve for that person, the one you might have been if connection had felt safer. There's grief for years spent hyper-vigilant, for all the moments you couldn't be present because you were preparing for loss, for all the good things you couldn't fully enjoy because you were waiting for them to end, for all the love you couldn't receive because you were too afraid it would disappear. Time you can't get back, moments you experience through a filter of fear instead of presence. That's grief, too. You grieve the childhood that taught you love wasn't safe, the early experiences that shaped this pattern, the parent who was inconsistent, the caregiver who left, the environment that taught you that connection is conditional. You can't change what happened, can't undo the learning, but you can mourn it, can acknowledge that something important was missing, that you deserved better, that the fear you carry isn't your fault even if it's your responsibility now. And there's a particular kind of painful question that comes with this grief. What if I'd been different? What if I hadn't been so afraid? What if I'd believed them when they said they cared? What if I'd asked for help instead of pretending I was fine? What if I'd stayed instead of running? The what ifs are endless, and they hurt, because you can't know, can't go back, can't test what might have happened if your nervous system had felt safe. This grief is complicated because nothing obviously terrible happened. At least nothing you can easily point to. When someone experiences dramatic trauma, their grief is validated. but yours is harder to explain. How do you grieve the absence of something? How do you grieve inconsistent love? How do you grieve the safety you never had? The grief feels real to you, but illegitimate somehow, like you're overreacting, like others had it worse, like you should be over this by now. So you downplay your own grief, you minimize it, just like you've learned to minimize everything else. It wasn't that bad. Other people had worse. I'm being dramatic. I should just move on. This self-invalidation becomes one more way you abandon yourself, one more way you dismiss your own experience, one more way you decide your feelings are too much. Even grief about abandonment gets experienced as something you should abandon. But grief is not weakness. Grief is recognition. It's finally seeing with clear eyes what fear cost you. And that seeing is not self-pity. It's not dramatic. It's just honest. You lost time. You lost connection. You lost parts of yourself. That deserves acknowledgement, deserves space, deserves to be felt without judgment. Because grief is how you process loss. And you experienced loss. Not just loss of relationships, loss of safety, loss of trust, loss of your ability to be fully present in connection. That matters. That's real. And it's okay to grieve it. This grief, difficult as it is, marks something important. It marks the beginning of seeing clearly, seeing what was, seeing what is, seeing what's been lost, and that seeing, painful as it is the first step towards something different. Because you can't heal what you can't acknowledge, and you can't change patterns you won't admit are there. The grief is the beginning of recognition, and recognition is where healing starts. Because healing from abandonment anxiety doesn't start where most people think it does. It doesn't start with forcing yourself to be braver. Doesn't start with white-knuckling through fear. Doesn't start with demanding that your nervous system just stop being afraid. It starts somewhere quieter, somewhere more fundamental. It starts with understanding. Healing from abandonment anxiety doesn't begin with forcing yourself to be less afraid. It begins with understanding why you're afraid in the first place, not understanding intellectually. You probably already know where it came from. You can point to the childhood experiences, the inconsistent parent, the loss, the conditional love. But intellectual understanding isn't enough. The kind of understanding that heals goes deeper. It's understanding in your nervous system. Understanding that what you developed wasn't a flaw, it was an adaptation. Your nervous system isn't broken, it learned. It learned brilliantly. It detected patterns in your early environment and adapted to survive them. When love was inconsistent, your system learned to monitor constantly. When connection was conditional, your system learned to perform. When closeness led to loss, your system learned to prepare for abandonment. This wasn't dysfunction. This was your brain doing exactly what it's designed to do. Protect you. The problem isn't that your nervous system learned. The problem is that it's still running the same program it learned in childhood, still monitoring for threats that might not be there, still preparing for abandonment that might not come, still operating as if the people you're close to now will behave like the people who taught you love was unsafe. The pattern made sense then. It's just not serving you now. Healing starts when you can look at your abandonment anxiety without shame, not as evidence that you're broken, but as evidence that you survived something difficult. You survived inconsistent care. You survived conditional love. You survived loss. And the way you survived was by becoming hypervigilant, by learning to read people, by preparing for worst outcomes. That wasn't weak. That was adaptive. The problem is the adaptation outlived its usefulness. This shift in perspective matters, because if you see your anxiety as dysfunction, you approach it with shame, with the belief that something is wrong with you, that you need to fix yourself, that you're defective. And shame doesn't heal anything. Shame makes you want to hide, makes you reject the parts of yourself that need care, makes you abandon yourself again. But if you can see your anxiety as adaptation, as a brilliant but now outdated survival strategy, you can approach it with compassion, with curiosity, with the recognition that it made sense and that it can be updated. Healing doesn't happen through willpower. You can't force yourself to stop being afraid. Can't logic yourself into feeling safe. Can't think your way out of a nervous system response. Because this isn't happening in your thinking brain. It's happening in your limbic system. In the part of your brain that learned, before you had words, that connection is dangerous. Willpower can't reach that place. Only new experience can. Repeated, consistent experience that teaches your nervous system something different. That connection can be safe, that people can stay, that you don't have to prepare for abandonment constantly. The first step isn't to stop being afraid. The first step is to stop being afraid of your fear. To recognize that the fear is trying to help you. It's just using outdated information. Your fear isn't the enemy. It's a part of you that's still trying to protect the child who learned that love could disappear. That part needs compassion, not condemnation. Needs updating, not elimination. When you can approach your fear with understanding instead of judgment, something shifts. The fear doesn't disappear, but it doesn't control you the same way. You start to recognize the fear when it shows up. Oh, this is my abandonment anxiety. This is my nervous system detecting threat. This feeling isn't necessarily accurate information about what's happening now. It's old information, old learning. The pattern my brain developed a long time ago. This recognition creates a small but crucial space. The space between stimulus and response, between feeling afraid and acting on the fear. That space is where healing happens. Understanding your nervous system means recognizing triggers without shame. Oh, they didn't text back quickly and now I'm spiraling. That's a trigger. Their tone seemed different and now I'm convinced they're leaving. That's a trigger. They need space and I'm panicking. That's a trigger. Recognizing the trigger doesn't make it go away, but it helps you see it for what it is. A learned response, not necessarily accurate information about current reality. Healing also requires understanding neuroplasticity. Your brain can learn new patterns. The neural pathways that learn to fear abandonment can be slowly, gradually updated, not through force, through repeated new experience. Your brain learned that connection is unsafe through repeated experience of unsafe connection. It can learn that connection can be safe through repeated experience of safe connection. But this is slow, gradual. it doesn't happen in one moment of insight. It happens through thousands of small moments where your nervous system experiences something different and survives. This means healing isn't about fixing yourself. It's about befriending yourself, understanding yourself, recognizing that the patterns you carry made sense, that the fear is trying to help even when it's not helping, that your nervous system is doing its job. It's just doing a job that's no longer necessary, and you can slowly, gently teach it something new. Not through criticism, through compassion, through new experience, through patience with yourself as your system slowly updates its programming. The goal isn't to never feel fear. The goal is to not let fear make all your decisions, to be able to notice the fear and still stay present, still stay connected, still risk being vulnerable, not because the fear goes away, but because you learn that you can survive the discomfort. That fear doesn't have to mean danger, that your nervous system can be afraid, and you can still choose differently than the fear wants you to choose. From this foundation of understanding, specific practices become possible, and one of the most important is learning to self-soothe, learning that you can calm your own nervous system instead of relying entirely on others to do it for you. One of the deepest patterns for people with abandonment anxiety is this. You learned that calm comes from outside, not inside. That regulation happened through other people. That when you're scared, someone else has to make it better. This makes sense. Children need co-regulation. They need caregivers to help them calm down when they're upset. But when that co-regulation is inconsistent or absent, the child never learns to self-soothe. They grow into an adult who still believes that calm requires another person. This creates a devastating dependency, not the healthy interdependence of secure attachment, but a fragile dependency where your emotional state relies entirely on someone else's availability. When they're present, you can calm down. When they're not, you can't. When they respond quickly, you're okay. When they don't, you spiral. This puts enormous pressure on relationships because it makes the other person responsible for regulating your nervous system. And that's an impossible task. No one can be available every moment you need soothing. No one can perfectly regulate another adult's emotional system. Learning to self-soothe doesn't mean you don't need others. It means you're not entirely dependent on them to survive your own emotions. It means when you're scared, you can offer yourself some of what you need instead of desperately seeking it entirely from outside. This isn't about becoming completely self-sufficient. It's about developing the ability to calm yourself enough to not be overwhelmed while waiting for connection. Self-soothing starts with the body, because fear doesn't just live in your thoughts. It lives in your chest, your stomach, your muscles, your breath. When abandonment fear triggers, your body responds. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense, your body is preparing for threat. And your thoughts, trying to explain what your body is feeling, create stories about abandonment. But sometimes you can interrupt the cycle by working with the body first. Breathing is the most direct way to influence your nervous system. When you're scared, your breath becomes shallow and fast. This tells your body that danger is present. If you can slow your breath deliberately, you send a different message to your nervous system that you're safe. Even when your mind is screaming that you're not, this doesn't make the fear vanish, but it can take the edge off, can create enough calm to think more clearly. Grounding practices help too. Feeling your feet on the ground, naming things you can see, hear, touch, pressing your hands together, running cold water over your wrists. These aren't magical solutions, but they're tools. Ways to bring your attention back to your body in the present moment instead of staying lost in fearful thoughts about future abandonment. They remind your nervous system that right now, in this moment, you're physically safe, even if you're emotionally scared. Self-talk matters, not the harsh self-criticism you usually engage in, but the kind of talk you'd offer someone you care about who's scared. I'm having abandonment anxiety right now. This feeling is real, but it doesn't mean the fear is accurate. I've felt this before and it passed. I can survive this discomfort. My nervous system is trying to protect me, but I'm actually safe right now. This isn't fixing the fear. It's accompanying yourself through it instead of making it worse with criticism. You can also learn to sit with discomfort without immediately seeking relief. This is hard. Your instinct when abandonment fear triggers is to seek reassurance immediately, to text, to call, to confirm that the person hasn't left. But sometimes you can practice tolerating the discomfort for just a few minutes. Not forever, not stoically, just a few minutes. Noticing that the fear is intense but not dangerous. That you can survive feeling afraid without immediately making it go away. This slowly teaches your nervous system that discomfort isn't emergency, that you can handle uncertainty, at least briefly. This doesn't mean you never seek reassurance. It means you're not entirely dependent on external reassurance to function. You develop some capacity to offer yourself what you need, to recognize when you're triggered, to calm yourself enough to not spiral completely, to survive the gap between feeling afraid and getting external comfort. This internal capacity is what allows you to have healthier relationships, because you're not asking the other person to be your only source of regulation. You're bringing some ability to manage your own nervous system, but self-soothing doesn't come naturally when it wasn't taught. You might not know how to comfort yourself, might not know what your own nervous system needs. This is okay. It's something you can learn, slowly, through experimentation, through noticing what helps even slightly. Through building a relationship with your own fear instead of just trying to escape it or have someone else fix it. This is reparenting yourself. Giving yourself now what wasn't given then. The ability to calm your own system, to survive your own emotions, to be less fragile in the face of uncertainty. Self-soothing isn't about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming less desperate, less dependent on immediate external rescue. It's about having a few tools you can use while you wait for connection, while you survive uncertainty, while you practice tolerating the discomfort of not knowing. And as you develop even a small capacity for self-soothing, the next step becomes possible. Testing new patterns. Changing abandonment patterns doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen through one big decision or one moment of courage. It happens in small, uncomfortable experiments. Little moments where you do something slightly different than your fear wants you to do, where you act against the pattern you've been running for years. These experiments feel terrifying. They should. You're going against what your nervous system believes will keep you safe. But they're how you teach your system something new. Start small, impossibly small. The experiments don't have to be dramatic, they can be tiny. Not apologizing unnecessarily one time, that's an experiment. Your instinct is to say sorry preemptively. This time, you don't. You notice the discomfort. The fear that not apologizing will cause rejection. But you sit with it. You survive it. You don't die. They don't leave. And your nervous system gets one small piece of data, that not apologizing didn't cause abandonment, or expressing one need without immediately minimizing it. Usually if you express a need at all, you follow it with, but it's fine if you can't, or never mind, or I'm probably just being needy. This time, you state the need and stop. I'd like to spend time with you. Full stop. No qualification, no apology, no escape route. The discomfort is intense. Your system is screaming that you've done something dangerous, that you've revealed too much, that now they'll leave. But you sit with it, and nothing catastrophic happens. They either say yes or they say no, and the world doesn't end either way. Another experiment. Tolerating uncertainty. Normally, when someone doesn't respond to a text immediately, you spiral. You send follow-up texts. You check your phone constantly. You create narratives about what their silence means. This time, you practice sitting with not knowing. For 5 minutes, then 10, then an hour. Not forever, not as a punishment, just as practice. Practicing that you can survive not knowing. That uncertainty is uncomfortable but not dangerous. Your nervous system hates this. It wants certainty. It wants to know immediately that you're not being abandoned, but you can, in small doses, teach it that uncertainty doesn't mean abandonment. Or not checking your phone for a set period of time. Normally you're checking constantly, waiting for a response, looking for proof that someone's still there. This time you practice putting the phone down for 15 minutes, then 30, not as a rule, as an experiment, noticing what happens in your body, the anxiety that rises, the urge to check, the fear that something terrible is happening in those 15 minutes, but sitting with it, surviving it, discovering that when you finally do check, the world hasn't ended. They haven't disappeared. Your worst fear didn't materialize just because you weren't monitoring constantly. These experiments feel huge even when they're tiny, because they go against everything your nervous system believes is safe. Your system believes that monitoring keeps you safe, that apologizing prevents rejection, that minimizing needs prevents abandonment, that seeking constant reassurance prevents loss. So when you do something different, even something small, it triggers fear, real fear. Your body responds as if you've done something dangerous. That's normal, expected. The point isn't to not feel the fear. The point is to do the thing anyway, to survive the fear, to give your nervous system evidence that the old pattern isn't the only way. Start with situations that feel lower stakes, not with your most important relationship, not with the person whose opinion matters most. Start with friendships, with casual connections, with situations where the outcome matters but won't devastate you. Practice there. Build evidence there. Let your nervous system learn there. And as you get small pieces of evidence that you can do things differently and survive, you can gradually try these experiments in higher stakes relationships. Sometimes the experiments will fail. Sometimes you'll express a need and the person will respond negatively. Sometimes you'll stop apologizing and someone will take it badly. Sometimes you'll tolerate uncertainty and it will turn out that yes, they were pulling away. This doesn't mean the experiment was wrong. It means you got information about this person, about this relationship, about whether they're actually capable of meeting you where you are. And that information, painful as it is valuable, because not everyone is safe. And learning to differentiate between situations where your fear is accurate and situations where it's just old programming, that's part of healing. The experiments teach you that discomfort isn't danger. That feeling afraid doesn't mean you're in actual danger. That your nervous system can scream at you and you can survive. This is how you slowly update the programming, not through one big insight, through thousands of small moments where you feel afraid and do something different anyway, where you survive, where you discover that the catastrophe you feared didn't happen, or if it did happen, you survived that too. As these experiments accumulate, something deeper changes. You start to notice patterns, not just in yourself but in others. You start to recognize which relationships feed your anxiety and which ones actually feel safe. And you start to realize that healing involves choosing differently. One of the most important parts of healing is recognizing that not all relationships are equal. Some will feed your anxiety, some will calm it. Some relationships will activate every abandonment fear you carry. Others will feel genuinely safe. Even if the safety feels uncomfortable at first because it's unfamiliar. Learning to recognize the difference, learning to choose relationships that support healing instead of reinforcing old patterns, that's crucial. You might notice that you're attracted to people who are inconsistent, who are warm one day and cold the next, who are available sometimes but emotionally distant other times. This feels familiar. Your nervous system, in its strange logic, is drawn to patterns it recognizes, even painful patterns. Because familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar safety. You know how to navigate inconsistency. You learn that as a child. So you're drawn to it as an adult. Even though it keeps you in the exact dynamic that created your abandonment fear in the first place. This is the anxious avoidant trap. You, with your abandonment anxiety, often end up with avoidant partners, people who need lots of space, who pull away when things get close, who struggle with emotional availability, and this creates a painful dynamic. You pursue, they withdraw, you get more anxious, they get more distant, you cling harder, they pull away more. Each person's pattern triggers the others. Your anxiety triggers their need for space. Their withdrawal triggers your fear of abandonment, and the cycle reinforces itself. It's not that avoidant people are bad. They're not. They have their own history, their own wounds, their own reasons for struggling with closeness. But a relationship between someone who fears abandonment and someone who fears engulfment is difficult. because your core fears are opposite. You're afraid they'll leave. They're afraid you'll trap them. You need reassurance. They need space. You experience their need for space as abandonment. They experience your need for closeness as suffocation. Neither is wrong. But the dynamic is painful for both. You might also notice that you're attracted to people who are unavailable in other ways. People who are already in relationships. People who are emotionally shut down. People who have told you explicitly they're not looking for anything serious. And part of you knows this won't work, but another part of you is drawn to it. Because unavailable people can't abandon you. Not really, because they were never fully there in the first place. Choosing unavailable people protect you from the full devastation of being left, because you never fully have them, so you never fully lose them. These patterns make sense. Your nervous system is trying to protect you, but they keep you stuck, keep you in relationships that confirm your fear instead of healing it, keep you anxiously attached instead of moving towards security. Healing involves recognizing these patterns and making different choices, choosing people who can actually be available, who can offer consistency, who aren't triggered by your need for reassurance, who can handle closeness without pulling away. Secure attachment, when you first encounter it, might feel wrong, boring even, because it doesn't have the intensity you're used to, doesn't have the highs and lows, doesn't have the constant fear and relief cycle. Someone who texts back consistently doesn't give you the rush of finally getting a response after hours of anxiety. Someone who shows up reliably doesn't give you the relief of wondering if they'd come through. Secure feels flat, calm, uneventful, and your nervous system, trained on inconsistency, doesn't know what to do with consistent care. You might find yourself creating drama in secure relationships, testing them, pulling away to see if they'll chase, manufacturing conflict to create intensity, not consciously. But your system is trying to recreate familiar patterns, trying to turn secure into anxious because anxious is what you know. This is normal. Expected. Your nervous system is resisting healing because healing feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels dangerous. Even when unfamiliar is actually safer, learning what secure attachment feels like takes time. It feels like someone who responds consistently, not immediately always, but reliably. Someone who communicates clearly, who doesn't disappear without explanation, who can handle your anxiety without becoming responsible for it. Someone who doesn't punish you for having needs, but also doesn't let your needs consume the relationship. Someone who shows up, who stays, who doesn't make you guess where you stand. Secure people won't fix you, won't cure your abandonment anxiety, but they won't exploit it either, won't use your fear against you, won't withdraw when you need reassurance, won't make you feel bad for needing what you need. They'll have boundaries. They'll say no sometimes, but they'll say no clearly. Not through cold distance, through clear communication. And that clarity, that consistency, that's what your nervous system needs to start believing that connection can be safe. Healing means learning to choose these people, even when they don't create the intensity you're used to. Even when secure feels boring at first. Even when your system wants to run back to familiar anxiety. Healing means staying with someone who's actually available. Letting your nervous system slowly learn that available doesn't mean dangerous. That consistent doesn't mean trap. That secure doesn't mean boring. It means safe. And safe is what you've needed all along. But perhaps the most important relationship to repair, the one that underlies all others, is the relationship with yourself. Because you can have the most secure partner in the world and still feel anxious if you're abandoning yourself, if you're still rejecting your own needs, still criticizing yourself for having feelings, still deciding that who you are is too much. The deepest work isn't learning to attach securely to others, it's learning to attach securely to yourself. The deepest work isn't learning to attach securely to others, it's learning to attach securely to yourself, to stop abandoning yourself, to reconnect with the parts of you that you've been rejecting, to allow your full self to exist instead of just the edited, palatable version. This is harder than it sounds, because you've spent years learning to be less, learning to need less, learning to shrink yourself. Reclaiming yourself requires unlearning all of that. Start by recognizing when you're abandoning yourself. This happens constantly. Every time you say you're fine when you're not. Every time you minimize your feelings. Every time you talk yourself out of needing something. Every time you default to whatever you want instead of checking in with what you actually want. Every time you accommodate when you want to say no. Every time you dismiss your own hurt. That's self-abandonment. That's you rejecting yourself. And the first step is just noticing when it happens. Notice the moment when someone asks what you want and your mind goes blank, not because you don't have preferences, but because you've trained yourself not to check. The moment when you start to express hurt and then talk yourself out of it. The moment when you need reassurance but tell yourself you're being needy. The moment when you want to reach out but decide you're bothering them. These moments are opportunities to do something different, to choose yourself instead of abandoning yourself. Try connecting with your actual needs. This is harder than it sounds. You've been overriding your needs for so long that you might not know what they are. Someone asks what you want for dinner. You default to whatever you want. This time, pause. Actually check. What do I want? Not what's easiest. Not what they probably want. What do I actually want? And practice saying it. Even if it's just I'd like Italian food. Even if it's small, it's practice. Practice having preferences. Practice mattering to yourself. Practice saying I don't know yet instead of defaulting to whatever you want. This is huge. Because I don't know yet acknowledges that you're a person with preferences who deserves time to check in with yourself. It's not I don't care. It's not whatever's fine. It's I'm a person whose opinion matters and I need a moment to check in with myself. This feels uncomfortable. Your nervous system says this is dangerous. This is being difficult. This is being too much. But it's not. It's just being a person. Allow yourself to want things. Not just physical things, emotional things. I want reassurance. I want connection. I want to feel close to someone. I want to be checked on. These desires feel dangerous because they've led to disappointment before, but they're not wrong. They're human. Everyone wants these things. Acknowledging that you want them isn't weakness, it's honesty. And honesty with yourself is the foundation of not abandoning yourself. Practice staying with your feelings instead of immediately dismissing them. You feel hurt. Your instinct is to talk yourself out of it. It's not a big deal. I'm being too sensitive. They probably didn't mean it that way. This time, pause. Let the hurt be there. I feel hurt. Full stop. No justification. No minimizing. No talking yourself out of it. Just acknowledging that you feel something. This doesn't mean you have to act on every feeling. It means you stop rejecting your feelings before you've even fully experienced them. Learn to recognize self-abandonment in language. Listen to how you talk about yourself. Notice the contempt, the criticism, the dismissal. Notice when you call yourself too much, too needy, too sensitive, too broken. Would you talk to someone you love this way? Then why is it okay to talk to yourself this way? This isn't about toxic positivity, it's about basic respect. You can notice your patterns without condemning yourself for having them. You can want to change without deciding that who you are now is unacceptable. Start differentiating between being selfish and being whole. You've learned that having needs is selfish, that expressing wants is selfish, that taking up space is selfish. But that's not accurate. Selfish is demanding that your needs always come first. Having needs isn't selfish, it's human. Expressing them isn't selfish, it's honest. Taking up space isn't selfish, it's existing. You're allowed to exist fully. You're allowed to have needs. You're allowed to take up space. That's not too much. That's just enough. That's you. Practice sitting with discomfort when you choose yourself, when you say no, when you express a need, when you state a preference. Your nervous system will scream, will tell you this is dangerous, that you've done something wrong, that now they'll leave. Sit with that discomfort. Breathe through it. Remind yourself that discomfort doesn't mean danger, that your feelings of fear don't mean you made a wrong choice. Sometimes doing the right thing feels scary. That doesn't make it wrong. Reclaiming yourself means accepting that your needs, your feelings, your full presence are not too much. They're just you. And you don't need to be smaller to be lovable. You don't need to need less to be acceptable. You don't need to edit yourself to deserve connection. The version of you that needs reassurance sometimes, that's not the broken version. That's just a version. The version of you that feels intensely, that's not the too much version. That's just you. The version of you that wants closeness, that's not the needy version. That's the human version. This doesn't mean you never adjust yourself in relationships. Healthy relationships require both people to adapt to each other. But adaptation is different from self-abandonment. Adaptation is flexible. Self-abandonment is erasure. Adaptation is I can meet you halfway. Self-abandonment is I'll become whoever you need me to be. Adaptation honors both people. Self-abandonment only honors one, and it's not you. As you reconnect with yourself, as you stop abandoning the parts of you that need care, something shifts in how you experience connection. Because when you're not constantly rejecting yourself, you stop expecting everyone else to reject you. When you're not constantly deciding you're too much, you stop waiting for others to decide it too. The relationship you have with yourself starts to shift how you exist in relationships with others. Not perfectly, not immediately, but gradually, quietly. The way real change happens. As you begin to understand your abandonment anxiety, something quiet shifts, not dramatically, not suddenly, not in one moment of insight that changes everything, but gradually. In small ways you barely notice at first. You start to recognize the fear when it shows up. Oh, this is my pattern. This is the abandonment anxiety talking. This feeling is real, but it doesn't mean the fear is accurate. That recognition doesn't make the fear disappear, but it creates a tiny space, the space between feeling afraid and believing the fear is true. You start to distinguish between real danger and old patterns. Someone doesn't text back immediately, and the old pattern says they're abandoning you. But now, sometimes you can recognize that as pattern rather than fact. Maybe they're just busy. Maybe this is my anxiety, not accurate information about what's happening. You don't always believe this. Sometimes the fear wins, sometimes you still spiral, but occasionally you catch yourself. You recognize the pattern. You choose to wait before reacting, and the catastrophe you feared doesn't happen. You start to notice that you can feel anxious and still stay present. The anxiety doesn't have to control your behavior. You can feel afraid that someone's pulling away and not immediately seek reassurance. You can feel the urge to test the relationship and not act on it. You can notice the fear and not let it make all your decisions. This doesn't happen every time, but it happens sometimes, and those sometimes accumulate. They teach your nervous system that you can survive feeling afraid. That fear doesn't have to dictate action. Small moments of staying with discomfort become victories. You didn't check your phone for 30 minutes. You expressed a need without apologizing. You said no without excessive explanation. You felt hurt and mentioned it instead of pretending you were fine. These moments feel small, inconsequential, but they're not. They're evidence. Evidence that you can do things differently, that your nervous system can handle more uncertainty than it thought, that you're stronger than your fear tells you you are. You stop being at war with yourself. The harsh self-criticism softens, not completely, not perfectly, but the voice that calls you too much, too needy, too broken, it gets quieter. Or you get better at not believing it. You start to recognize that voice as old learning, not truth, as internalized criticism, not accurate assessment. You start to treat yourself with more of the compassion you've always offered others, not all the time, but more than before. The fear doesn't disappear. This is important. Healing from abandonment anxiety doesn't mean you'll never feel afraid, doesn't mean you'll become one of those people who doesn't need reassurance or doesn't get scared when someone seems distant. The fear is still there, but your relationship to it changes. You're not controlled by it the same way. You can have the fear and still function, can feel afraid and still stay connected, can notice the pattern without acting on it automatically. You learn that you can feel anxious and the person can still be there, that your anxiety doesn't drive everyone away, that some people can handle your fear without making it about them, that secure people don't abandon you for having needs. This learning happens slowly, through repeated experience of someone staying when you expected them to leave, someone not punishing you for being afraid, someone meeting your reasonable needs without making you feel bad for having them. This repeated experience slowly teaches your nervous system something it never learned before. That connection can be safe. You start to trust yourself more. Trust that you can survive your own feelings. Trust that you can regulate your nervous system at least somewhat. Trust that you can handle uncertainty, at least for short periods. Trust that you can express needs without catastrophe. This self-trust is fragile at first, easily shaken, but it grows with each time you survive discomfort, with each time you choose yourself and the world doesn't end. With each small victory over the old pattern, the self-trust builds, and perhaps most importantly, you start to recognize that you're not your abandonment anxiety. The fear is something you have, not something you are. You're not broken, you're not defective, you're not too much. You're a person who learned to fear abandonment because abandonment or inconsistency or conditional love was part of your early experience. That learning made sense. It was adaptive. It helped you survive. But it's not who you are. It's a pattern you carry. And patterns can be slowly, gradually, gently updated. You recognize that the person who learned to expect abandonment can learn something else. Not that abandonment will never happen. That's not realistic. People do leave. Relationships do end. Loss is part of life. But you can learn that even if abandonment happens, you won't abandon yourself. Even if someone leaves, you'll stay with yourself. Even if you lose connection with others, you won't lose connection with yourself. And that changes everything. Because the fear of abandonment is devastating when you believe that being abandoned means you're unlovable. But when you know that your worth isn't determined by who stays, the fear loses some of its power. You learn that you can hold both things, the fear and the healing, the anxiety and the growth, the old pattern and the new possibility. You don't have to wait until you're completely healed to be in relationships. Don't have to wait until you're perfectly secure to deserve love. You can be in process, can be healing and still worthy, can still carry fear and still be worth staying for. Not because you've fixed yourself, but because you never needed fixing. You needed understanding, you needed compassion, you needed some of what you didn't get before. And you're learning to give that to yourself. When you can stay with yourself through the fear, when you can hold yourself through the uncertainty, when you stop making yourself smaller to feel safer, something settles. Not loudly, not suddenly, but quietly. Like finally coming home, not to a place, to yourself. To the part of you that's been waiting all these years to be recognized, to be held, to be allowed to exist fully without apology, to be seen not as too much but as enough, as whole, as worthy of connection, not because you've perfected yourself, but because you're human. And being human means needing connection, means wanting reassurance sometimes, means feeling scared of loss. That's not dysfunction. That's not too much. That's just being alive, just being vulnerable, just being open to connection even when connection has hurt before. And in that settling, in that quiet homecoming, you realize something. The person who spent years preparing for abandonment can stop preparing, can start being present, can let people in without constantly monitoring whether they're about to leave. Not because you're suddenly fearless, but because you've learned that you can survive fear. That fear doesn't have to control you. That connection is worth the risk, even knowing that loss is possible, that being seen, being known, being loved for who you actually are, that's worth the vulnerability, worth the uncertainty, worth the possibility of hurt. Because the alternative, staying hidden to stay safe, that's not safety. That's just another kind of loss. Loss of yourself, loss of real connection, loss of the life you could have if you stopped letting fear make every decision. You were never too much. You were just afraid of being left, and that fear was reasonable, made sense given what you learned. But fear doesn't have to be the final word, doesn't have to define every relationship, doesn't have to determine your worth. You can be afraid and still worthy, can have needs and still be lovable, can want reassurance and still deserve connection, can carry abandonment anxiety and still be someone worth staying for. Not in spite of the fear, just alongside it, as a whole person, a person who's been hurt, a person who's scared, a person who's healing, a person who's learning, a person who's enough, exactly as you are, exactly as you've always been, even when you couldn't see it. Even when fear told you otherwise, you've always been worth staying for. You're just finally starting to believe it. And in that settling, in that quiet homecoming, you realize something. The person who spent years preparing for abandonment can stop preparing, can start being present, can let people in without constantly monitoring whether they're about to leave. Not because you're suddenly fearless, but because you've learned that you can survive fear. That fear doesn't have to control you. That connection is worth the risk, even knowing that loss is possible, that being seen, being known, being loved for who you actually are, that's worth the vulnerability, worth the uncertainty, worth the possibility of hurt. Because the alternative, staying hidden to stay safe, that's not safety. That's just another kind of loss. Loss of yourself, loss of real connection, loss of the life you could have if you stopped letting fear make every decision. But understanding this doesn't mean the work is finished. Healing isn't a destination. It's not something you arrive at and then never have to think about again. It's ongoing, it's daily, it's choosing, over and over, to respond differently than your fear wants you to, and some days that's easier than others. Relationships while you're healing look different than relationships before you started this work. You're more aware now, more conscious of your patterns, more able to recognize when you're being triggered versus when you're responding to actual danger. But awareness doesn't prevent all the old patterns from emerging. It just means you catch them sooner. Recognize them more clearly. Have more choice about whether to act on them. You might notice yourself in a new relationship and feeling the familiar panic rising. They didn't text back for an hour and your chest tightens. Your mind starts building the narrative. They're pulling away. This is the beginning of the end. I knew this wouldn't last. But now, sometimes, you can pause. You can recognize this as pattern. Oh, this is my abandonment anxiety. This is the old program running. And you can choose. Choose to wait before sending the anxious follow-up text. Choose to sit with the discomfort for a bit. Choose to remind yourself that 1 hour doesn't mean abandonment. You won't always make that choice. Sometimes the fear will be too strong. Sometimes you'll send the text anyway. Sometimes you'll spiral despite knowing better. And that's okay. That's not failure. That's being human. Healing isn't about perfect execution. It's about slightly more awareness, slightly more choice, slightly more capacity to tolerate uncertainty. The progress is incremental, barely noticeable day to day. But when you look back over months, over years, you can see it. The spiral happens less often, lasts shorter periods, feels less catastrophic. In relationships where you're trying to heal, communication becomes crucial. Not the anxious communication where you're constantly seeking reassurance, but clear communication about your patterns, being able to say to someone, I have abandonment anxiety. Sometimes I'll get scared that you're leaving even when you're not. Sometimes I'll need reassurance. This isn't about you. This is about patterns I'm working on. This kind of honesty is vulnerable, terrifying even, because you're naming the thing you've always tried to hide, the neediness, the fear, the too muchness. But naming it with someone who's safe can actually create more safety, can help them understand that when you're anxious, it's not necessarily about something they did wrong. It's about something that got triggered in you. Healthy partners, secure partners, they can hold space for this. They can understand that your anxiety is yours to work on, but that they can support you without becoming responsible for fixing it. They can offer reassurance without it becoming an endless cycle. They can be consistent without being perfect. They can tolerate your fear without punishing you for it. And in that kind of relationship, your nervous system slowly learns something new. That fear can be expressed without causing abandonment. That vulnerability can be met with care. That imperfection doesn't equal rejection. But you also have to do your part. Have to work on the self-soothing. Have to practice tolerating uncertainty. Have to stop expecting them to regulate all your emotions. Have to take responsibility for your healing while also being honest about your struggles. This balance is delicate, tricky. You're learning to be both vulnerable about your patterns and accountable for working on them, to ask for support without demanding rescue, to express needs without making your needs their job to fix. This middle ground between complete independence and total dependence, this is where healing happens. You might find that some relationships can't hold this healing process. Some people, even well-meaning people, can't handle your growth, because your growth requires them to change too. If you've always been the one who accommodates, who says yes, who doesn't express needs, and you start doing things differently, they might not like it. They got comfortable with you being small. They benefited from you not having boundaries. Your healing disrupts the dynamic, and some relationships won't survive that disruption. This is painful, but it's also information. Information about whether the relationship was built on genuine connection or on your willingness to abandon yourself. The relationships that survive your healing are the ones worth keeping, because those are the relationships where you're wanted as you actually are, not as the performed version, where your growth is celebrated, not resisted, where your needs are welcome, not treated as burden, where your full self, fear, and all is accepted. These relationships feel different, calmer, less intense in some ways, but deeper, more real, more sustainable, because they're not built on you constantly monitoring and adjusting. They're built on actual compatibility, actual mutual care, actual ability to be yourself. Healing is not linear. This is important, crucial. You need to understand this, or you'll think you're failing when you're actually just being human. Healing from abandonment anxiety doesn't follow a straight line upward. It's messy, circular, full of setbacks that feel like you're back at the beginning even though you're not. You'll have good weeks where you feel secure, where you don't spiral, where you can tolerate uncertainty without panic, where you feel like you've finally figured it out, and then something will happen. Something small, something that shouldn't matter, and suddenly you're right back in the fear, right back in the hypervigilance, right back in the old pattern, and you'll feel like all your progress disappeared, like you haven't learned anything, like you're still as broken as you ever were, but you're not. The setback doesn't erase the progress. You're not back at the beginning. You're just having a hard moment, a hard day, a hard week. The pattern you spent years building doesn't disappear completely just because you've been working on it. It's still there, dormant sometimes, but ready to activate when you're stressed, when you're triggered, when your nervous system feels threatened. This doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. The difference is that now, often, you can recognize it, can name it. Oh, I'm having a setback. I'm in my old pattern right now. This is temporary. I've felt better than this before, and I'll feel better than this again. That recognition, that perspective, that's growth. Even when you're in the middle of spiraling, even when the fear feels as intense as it ever did, if you can recognize it as pattern rather than truth, you're not where you started. You're somewhere different, somewhere with more awareness, more tools, more capacity to ride out the storm. Setbacks often come when you're under stress, when work is overwhelming, when you're dealing with family issues, when you're sick, when your resources are depleted, when your nervous system is already taxed, it reverts to old programming more easily. This is normal, expected. Your brain, when overwhelmed, goes back to what it knows, back to familiar patterns, even if those patterns don't serve you. Because they're automatic, require less energy, feel safer in their familiarity even when they cause pain. Setbacks also happen when stakes feel higher. You might be fine with casual friendships but panic in romantic relationships. Might be calm when people don't matter much but anxious when someone becomes important. This makes sense. Your abandonment anxiety isn't about all connection. It's about connection that matters. Connection where loss would hurt. So as someone becomes more important to you, the fear rises. This doesn't mean you're regressing, it means you care. And caring for you has always been tied to fear of loss. This connection between caring and fear, this is what you're slowly working to untangle. When setbacks happen, self-compassion matters more than ever. The instinct is to criticize yourself. To decide the setback means you're hopeless, means you'll never get better, means all your work was pointless. But that criticism just makes everything worse, makes the setback deeper, longer, harder to climb out of. What you need instead is kindness. I'm having a hard time right now. This is a setback, not permanent regression. I've made progress even if I can't see it right now. I can handle this. I've survived before and I'll survive this too. Setbacks teach you things progress doesn't. They teach you that you can survive falling back into old patterns and climb out again. They teach you that growth isn't erased by temporary struggle. They teach you that you're stronger than your worst moments. They teach you self-compassion in ways that good days never could. Because it's easy to be kind to yourself when you're doing well. The real work is being kind to yourself when you're struggling. When you feel like you're failing. When the old patterns have you in their grip again. That's when self-compassion matters most. That's when you need it most, and that's when it's hardest to access. Over time, you might notice that setbacks become less frequent, less intense, shorter in duration. You fall into the old pattern, but you climb out faster. You recognize it sooner. You don't believe the fear quite as completely. The spiral still happens, but it doesn't pull you under quite as deep. This is progress, not the dramatic, obvious kind, the quiet kind. The kind you only notice when you compare now to a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. The kind where you realize you handled something differently than you would have before. Not perfectly, just differently. And different is enough. Different is progress. As you heal, as you learn to live alongside the fear instead of being controlled by it, you start to understand something important about connection. You start to recognize the difference between healthy interdependence and anxious attachment. They can look similar on the surface. Both involve needing others. Both involve emotional investment. But underneath, they're fundamentally different. Anxious attachment is rooted in fear, in the belief that you can't survive without this specific person, that their presence is what keeps you okay, that losing them would be catastrophic. It's connection from desperation, from need that feels like drowning, from terror of being alone. When you're anxiously attached, the other person isn't just important, they're necessary. They're your lifeline, your stability, your worth. Without them, you're not sure you'd exist in any meaningful way. This creates enormous pressure on them to be perfect, on you to keep them, on the relationship to bear weight it was never meant to carry. Healthy interdependence is different. It's rooted in choice, in the recognition that you can survive alone, but you prefer to be connected. That you're okay on your own, but you're better together. That you want this person, but you don't need them to survive. It's connection from wholeness, not from lack. From genuine preference, not from terror. When you're interdependent, the other person is deeply important, but they're not your only source of worth, not your only source of stability, not your only reason for existing. You have yourself, you have other connections, you have internal resources. They add to your life. They don't define it. The difference shows up in how you experience their absence. When you're anxiously attached, their absence feels like emergency, like threat, like abandonment, even when they're just at work with friends, living their own life. You can't breathe properly when they're not available, can't function fully, need constant contact to feel okay. Their independence feels like rejection. Their time apart from you feels like pulling away. You need them present physically or digitally to regulate your nervous system. Without them, you're drowning. When you're interdependent, their absence is fine, not always easy. You miss them. You look forward to seeing them again. But you're okay while they're gone. You have your own life, your own friends, your own activities, your own internal stability. You can regulate your own nervous system well enough to tolerate separation. Their independence doesn't threaten you. Their time apart doesn't feel like abandonment. You trust that they'll return, that their absence doesn't mean they're leaving. That space doesn't mean distance. The difference shows up in reassurance. When you're anxiously attached, you need constant reassurance. The reassurance helps temporarily but never lasts, never sticks. You need to hear it again and again and again, because the reassurance isn't landing, isn't being absorbed, isn't building security. It's just temporarily quieting the panic. Until the panic rises again, and you need more. The need is bottomless, endless. Because you're asking external reassurance to heal an internal wound, and it can't. No amount of someone else telling you they're not leaving can fix the belief deep inside that you're not worth staying for. When you're interdependent, you sometimes need reassurance. This is normal, human. Everyone needs reassurance occasionally, but it's occasional, not constant. And when you get it, it lands, it helps, it sticks, at least for a while. Because you're not asking it to do the impossible. You're not asking it to heal your entire wound. You're asking it to soothe a temporary insecurity, to calm a specific fear, and it can do that, can meet that need, because that need is reasonable, meetable, finite. The difference shows up in boundaries. When you're anxiously attached, boundaries feel like rejection, feel like abandonment. When they say they need space, you panic. When they say no to something, you feel unloved. When they assert their own needs over yours, you feel abandoned. Because to your nervous system, their boundaries mean they don't care enough, mean they're pulling away, mean the end is beginning. So you push back against their boundaries, not because you're controlling, because boundaries trigger your deepest fear, that they're choosing distance, choosing away, choosing to leave. When you're interdependent, boundaries are understood as healthy, as necessary, as part of how two whole people coexist without merging. When they need space, you can respect it without spiraling. When they say no, you can hear it as information about their capacity, not rejection of you. When they assert their needs, you can understand that their needs mattering doesn't mean yours don't. Boundaries aren't threat. They're communication. They're how both people get to exist fully while staying connected. The difference shows up in your sense of self. When you're anxiously attached, your sense of self is fragile, dependent on their opinion, their mood, their presence. Who you are shifts based on how they see you. Your worth fluctuates based on their availability. You lose yourself in the relationship, become what they need, or what you think they need. Your identity becomes attached to being their partner. Your value becomes attached to them wanting you. Without the relationship, you're not sure who you'd be. When you're interdependent, your sense of self is stable, not perfect, not unshakable, but solid enough. You know who you are independent of them. You have your own interests, your own goals, your own identity. The relationship is important, deeply important, but it's not your entire identity. You exist separately, fully, completely. The relationship enhances who you are. It doesn't create who you are. If it ended, you'd be devastated, but you'd still be you. You wouldn't disappear, wouldn't cease to exist. You'd survive, you'd grieve, you'd heal, eventually. Because you're a whole person, not half of a whole. Moving from anxious attachment toward healthy interdependence is the work. Not moving to complete independence. Not deciding you don't need anyone, but finding the balance. Where you can need people without depending on them for your entire sense of safety. Where you can want connection without demanding it cure your abandonment wounds. Where you can be vulnerable without collapsing. Where you can ask for support without requiring rescue. This balance is where security lives, not in needing no one, not in needing one person for everything, but in needing yourself primarily and others additionally. In having internal stability that external connection enhances rather than creates. This shift doesn't happen quickly, doesn't happen through deciding it should be different. It happens through the slow accumulation of new experiences, through relationships where your needs are met without your needs consuming everything, through learning to self-soothe well enough that you're not entirely dependent on external regulation, through building a life that's full enough that one person isn't your everything, through developing the internal resources that make you less fragile, less desperate, less afraid, not because you don't care, but because you care from wholeness instead of from lack. You were never too much. You were just afraid of being left. And that fear was reasonable, made sense given what you learned. But fear doesn't have to be the final word, doesn't have to define every relationship, doesn't have to determine your worth. You can be afraid and still worthy, can have needs and still be lovable, can want reassurance and still deserve connection, can carry abandonment anxiety and still be someone worth staying for, not in spite of the fear, just alongside it, as a whole person, a person who's been hurt, a person who's scared, a person who's healing, a person who's learning, a person who's enough, exactly as you are, exactly as you've always been, even when you couldn't see it, even when fear told you otherwise. You've always been worth staying for. You're just finally starting to believe it.